Welcome everybody. Good evening to everyone in India, and I think good morning, good afternoon to all my other participants who join from different parts of the world. Uh, Summer Audit brings yet another complimentary webinar, Analytics Wednesday, under the series Analytics Wednesday. And today we have the 24th session. Uh, the topic is blockchain audit and opportunities. It will be led by CA Narasimhan Elangovan, who's a partner with Ken and Company and a senior advisor, Digital Security Services, Crow Advisory Services India LLP. A young, dynamic, energetic speaker. You will find that out soon, as he speaks to all of us. Today's topic is blockchain audit and opportunities. Once again, a very interesting topic. Uh, Sama Audit Systems and Softwares Private Limited, is the flagship, brings the flagship product idea, which is analytics products in the country for the last 20 years, and also has now working papers, caseware working papers, which is for the statutory audit, external audit a product, from end to end product for the CPA firms, CA firms in the country, in the region. They also represent Smart Exporter, which is a SAP ETL, which is used by a number of companies in the country, uh, and also brings a lot of training programs, the e-learning modules on idea and fraud analytics, and regularly holds a number of workshops in internal audit and risk management area. With this small introduction, let me formally introduce the speaker to you. And before that, let me just say that we are thankful to the High Commission of Canada, because it supported this event. This web series is supported by the Government of Canada Trade Commissioner Services. So with that, let me formally introduce to you the speaker. He is a futurist, a GRC professional, a keynote speaker today, and his areas of practice include data analytics, risk-based audit, privacy, impact assessments, internal audits, IS assurance audits, internal financial controls, IFC, SOX compliance, and SOC audits. In the past few years, he has also been advising in the emerging areas of technology, such as artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and big data. Now, he is a faculty for DISA, CISA, and courses on blockchain technology. He has authored more than 4 books for ICAI, KSCAA, etc. on technology. He is a regular speaker at a number of forums, national, international conferences. He has addressed ISACA international conferences at Asia CAX, Europe CAX, Africa CAX, North America CAX, and also was among the top rated and the youngest speaker. That is why I said, we have a very young, dynamic speaker with us today. He has spoken at international conferences at Dubai, Malaysia, Bangkok, Saudi Arabia. I can just go on and on. He has been identified as one of the top 10 influential consulting leaders 2020, an annual recognition for torchbearers in the consulting sphere by CEO Insights magazine. So, with this short introduction, let me request our speaker, Narasimhanji, to please take over.
Thank you so much, Deepji. Really a pleasure to meet all of you. Hope all of you are doing great, whichever part of the world you're joining in from. And since this being a 1-hour webinar, I'm going to keep it very short and very crisp, right? And that's, I think, the order of the day, right? Today we are flooded with so much of information. And as my mentor rightly calls it, we are flooded with data, right? Starving for information. And that's the reality of today. And that's where analytics, and that's where, the whole lot of this game actually makes a lot of sense, right? So let's quickly get started. I'm going to share my screen. Please give me a heads up if you're able to see my screen.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely fine. You can see it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And glad that I am being invited, and glad that I can share a few of my thoughts in this particular space. As I always claim, I am no expert. I always love to learn from you, all of them, and see where I can go ahead. Okay. So the agenda, what I'm going to give you is very simple. Why blockchain? What is blockchain? I know these are very fundamental. I think we have to address them, very important. And then we look into a few risks on blockchain. Of course, we'll also look into a few audit opportunities when it comes to blockchain. Okay, so that's the perspective. I also share practical thoughts on where we have done it, how it's taking place, and things like that. First, why blockchain? I think there's one word which you notice on the screen is the answer. Don't think, oh, blockchain is crypto, blockchain is this thing, sir. Cryptocurrency is just one of the largest use cases of blockchain. Today it's gone beyond crypto. Today we are talking about NFT, non-fungible tokens. We are talking about DeFi, decentralized finance. We are talking about very innovative model. Okay, and of course there are two types of blockchain. We'll address that a little later, but a very important question is why blockchain. Today we are flooded with so much of information that we don't know what to trust. We have so much of data, we are overloaded, as I said in the first instance itself, and we do have the fear, or we do not know what to trust and what not to trust. A simple example today is whether a GST invoice or whether a tax invoice, whether a transaction in its first place, is it real or not? And the trust deficit is the biggest challenge for today. Second, huge fake menace. Huge. We literally do not know how many fake products are actually circulating in the market. I was shocked to see an authorized showroom in one of these remote places selling actually a fake product. Okay, whether it was intentional or what, we do not know it, but that was the scenario. Anonymity, today we don't know who does what. And access to quality capital, quality resources, supply chain agility, trusting my supply chain. And there's a constant need for reconciliation. And if you are a professional, and typically in the Indian subcontinent, especially in the GST era, we are spending so much of time reconciling GSTR versus books, 2A versus 3B, 3B versus 1. I don't know what all numbers. And that's the unfortunate way in which things are happening. Well, there are solutions available. We're not going to talk about that. But we're talking about the challenges. And very important, no single version of truth. That is where the challenge today lies. So how is it that blockchain can probably help us out? What is it that key thing which blockchain is going to identify as a differentiator? And there's a little funny thing, and this is what is the state of affairs today. So the board asks you, hey, where should we focus? And you say blockchain, it'll change everything. Everybody is talking about potential application in this. We don't want to be left behind. So somebody asks, hey, what is blockchain? You just change gears and say, hey, let's focus on artificial intelligence. The reality is that spoken more, but known little. So let me see how best I can demystify this. What exactly is a blockchain? Layman's language, it is an append-only ledger. What is an append-only ledger? It's a ledger in the first place. So which means the moment it is a ledger, it is very close to accountants. Yes or no? It's very close to us. We live in a world where we are in and out, we are living in ledgers, balances, journal. Of course, please do not understand this to be a journal entry based ledger. Ledger is what? A set of transactions pertaining to a particular person or a party or a group of transactions relating to a common attribute. So it's an append only ledger. So any transaction which takes place, it will get appended to an existing. The word append is very important because it keeps on adding, it does not delete. That's the very important thing. It's a sequential database. One after the other, it keeps on getting added. And it is maintained by a decentralized network of users. Now, this is the key difference between a traditional system and this system. It is based on a decentralized setup. What is a decentralized setup? Or rather, I would actually go one level. I would use the word distributed, even though, okay, the source is again from the World Economic Forum, so certain things I obviously have to adhere to whatever they say. I would rather use the word distributed network. Now, what's a distributed network? A simple example, a holding company has its own books, subsidiary has its own books, or branch has its own books, corporate office has its own books. This is a distributed, or this is a decentralized environment. I have my data, you have your data. Okay. Centralized environment, entire data sits only in one place. Classical example, bank. Then what is this distributed? I have my data, I also have your data. You have your data, you also have my data. That means both of us have the entire set of data which is accessible, right? Maintained by a decentralized network of users. And every transaction which goes within the database is agreed upon. which means that I cannot pass entry into my system without your consent or vice versa. And this is popularly called as the consensus mechanism. And if you're used to a Bitcoin network, this is called as the process of mining. Of course, there the motive and the incentive are different, but this is what here it focuses on. Responsible for agreeing upon additions to the chain. And it is secured through a cryptography. Now, what's a cryptography? Layman's language, converting one form of text to another form of text. You send the word apple, or you send the word tomato, Zomato, whatever it is, you're sending it from here to there. You don't want anybody in between to knock it, modify it, etc. So what do? Simple. Send it in a different form which nobody can understand. So somebody thinks that there's random alphabets which is. And if you try to break open also, you'll not get an understand. Even if you modify, you do not know how to modify. And there are mechanisms through which you can identify. Right? So it is secured through cryptography. All right. And that's blockchain for you. How does it work? There's a transaction which has been entered. The transaction is broadcasted to a peer-to-peer network. In simple language, a set of systems. Each of this, I repeat, each of this is on par with the other. That's what is called a peer-to-peer. The traditional office systems in our, an SME office is a peer-to-peer network. Every computer is on par with each other. And every transaction, the moment it is broadcasted, it is validated. And the moment validation is there, then it's an acceptance. Once there's an acceptance, it goes into a series of transactions. I know this is something which you've been hearing of. I'll make it even more simple. Very simple. 4 of your friends decide to go on a road trip or, some family trip, whatever trip is there. So you decide to go on a particular trip, and now the real question is, who is going to keep track of your expenses? You might say, no, there is a fancy app, this, that, all those things. You said, forget it. I'll create one WhatsApp group. Each of us will keep posting our expenditure incurred in that particular WhatsApp group. The moment I say that I have posted 35,000, I've incurred for a flight, I've decided for that. Each person decides for a particular thing. I have one person in charge for flight, one person in charge for travel, internal cabs, etc. One person in charge for hotels, one person in charge for food. You decide that. Each of them post in that WhatsApp group, hey, this is what I've done, this is what I've done, this is what I've done. The moment a friend posts, other 3 gives a thumbs up, or they just say, okay. That's the typical process. Now, the moment this is done, my dear friends, all of the friends are giving a clearance. The moment all of the friends give a clearance, what happens? The transaction is entered and everybody is given a clearance. So will there be a dispute tomorrow? No. Is there a single source of truth? The answer is yes. That means to a large extent, your high-level issues are being taken care of and it's being sorted out, right? Now imagine the same thing. I'm not saying WhatsApp is on blockchain. Now, WhatsApp uses one of the features which is there in a blockchain, which is an encryption. We're not going to discuss the security attributes, and it's not a point of our consideration as well here. What is important to note is the way in which the transactions are being set. Quite similar to that, it happens. Let's take an automobile dealer. A manufacturer is supplying to an automobile dealer. The moment the automobile dealer pushes the car or the vehicle, or he accepts it, he passes a transaction. The moment the dealer receives it, he accepts it. Until then, it's in abeyance, whatever. It will appropriately get recorded. And the moment I accept it, the entry gets passed on both the set of books of accounts. Simple system like that. And the beauty of such a system is that the moment entry gets passed in both the set of books of accounts, where is the question of dispute? Where is the question of reconciliation? And the beauty is there is no concept of deletion of this transaction. Therefore, it is permanent, reasonably permanent. Solves the problem, right? And that's what blockchain is doing. Now you must be thinking, sir, why can't I use a traditional system? Why can't I use a traditional system? The problem with all these traditional systems, read-only system, etc., is they are discrete. There is no guarantee that your books, a creditor's books entry, is not based on a confirmation by a debtor or vice versa, whereas in a blockchain it is possible through technology powered by APIs and other things, right? So that's typically how it works. And if you thought in a blockchain there are very limited players, hang on, no. You see this bunch of players which are operating, and this is exactly how it is. You have the nodes on one side. Nodes are simple language, the endpoints, who has accounts, membership. Then you have the key management. And this is to do with private key, public key encryption. It's a peer-to-peer connectivity, correct? And you have the blockchain, you have the on-chain data and off-chain data. What is off-chain data? I'll come back to it in a few slides from now. It's a distributed ledger. I think I made a mention of it. There is some sort of an incentive for you to process the transaction. In the crypto world, the mining fees. In a non-crypto world, in our world or in our financial world, it is what I call it as the savings in cost, the savings in reconciliation, whatever it is. And the underlying infrastructure is a cryptographic hash, you have a messaging system, you have an event on the transaction. And on the decentralized, you have an SDK, software development kits and other things. You have a runtime execution and you have an API. These are essential components when it comes to any blockchain system. Great, so what now? Types of blockchain. This is where is the whole ball game coming into play. Enterprises are thinking of developing their own blockchain, and that's popularly called as enterprise blockchain or a private blockchain. A simple example of what is a public and a difference. A public is open to everybody, Bitcoin. A private is open only to a close set of people, which means like a bank, a network of banks, etc. By the way, Indian government or the NPCI and the Niti Aayog have come up with a blockchain platform, which is still fairly under very early stage. It's called as Vajra. Okay, you can visit the Niti Aayog platform. You'll be able to get some information based on that. It's a worthwhile read for you to go through it. And it's a private blockchain. In case of identity of a public blockchain is anonymous or pseudonymous. So you don't know who's doing what. In a private blockchain, you know what it is. Private blockchain is simple. You can define your terms and rules. To an extent, it goes against the fundamental principle of, democratization, but you still have to have some sort of regulation. Otherwise, you will not have any person to do what, etc. Right? Access to network, public, you don't require any access. Anybody can join. Private is, permissioned. Code is open source because everybody wants it. Private is quasi. Trust. No trust and private is trusted. Why it is no trust? Again, these are different ways of perspective. When you refer to a public blockchain, you do not know with whom you're dealing with. So therefore, there is that element which you have a suspicion. Whereas in a private, you already know it's regulated. Append to blockchain, there are concepts we're not going to go into too much of it. Examples of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, Hyperledger are private. Authority ownership is none. Private, there is an ownership. A company owns it. Validation, anybody can do it. Whereas in private, only approved nodes can do it. Next comes a very important, and please note, without knowing these fundamental concepts, if I directly go into explaining what exactly are the audit opportunities or security challenges, I'm afraid we may not be able to serve the purpose, right? So that's the reason I'm spending a little extra time trying to take you through this entire ambit of things. Smart contracts. Imagine a system where the moment you finish rendering your services on the T day or T plus 5 day, T plus 25 day, whatever, through an auto trigger, the payment comes to your bank account. Imagine a system where a singer, after his song is gone live, or his art piece or whatever, his artistic work, the painter artistic work is gone live. The moment people start viewing it, people start subscribing to it, the payment goes through and immediately he gets his royalty. It could be, of course, on a batch run basis, on a daily basis, but at least there is a seamless way in which you're doing it. Now, if you are bringing a system like that, which is bound to get executed irrespective of whatever is going to happen, a self-executed contract, that's a smart contract fee. It's a computer program that has a prescribed number of conditions stored and processed on a distributed ledger. And it stays dormant until it is called for a transaction, which means there should be an event, there should be a trigger. And the transactions performed are written into a distributed ledger. Therefore, there is no question of a transaction not taking place, right? And it's distributed into a distributed ledger, which means all the parties will have to accept, or they have already given the predetermined consent. And there are a bunch of these DApps, decentralized apps, which are actually, in a blockchain-enabled applications, and they rely on smart contracts for logic processing. But let me tell you, with the invention of smart contracts, the utilization or the usage of blockchain significantly increased. Significantly increased, right? The business use cases. And let's take a simple example. In the Indian system or across the globe, there is a mechanism where input tax credit or tax credits are given only if the purchaser or the vendor on the other end has actually uploaded or sold their invoices, etc. Now, if that has to take place through a smart contract, it's easily possible, right? And not to forget a very important person called as an oracle. Oracle is an agent or a third party who links what is called as the off-chain and the on-chain. Let me give a very simple example. You'll be able to understand this. So let's say an insurance company is coming up with a smart contract blockchain powered solution where one of the things or one of the challenges which they have, all right, one of the challenges which they have is that they expect everybody to come onto the blockchain system. And if a police case has to be filed, the first information report or an FIR document, those information require some bit of validation, and you can't expect the government and the regulators in the police department to get connected to the network. So what is it that you do? You appoint an authority, a real-time agent, or an entity who validates certain transactions which happens outside of the blockchain, and he stamps and he pushes it into the blockchain system. And such person or such agency is called as an auditor. So he is an agent who finds and verifies a real world occurrence, submits it to the information to a blockchain, which can be used by way of a smart contract. And that's where he or she or that agency or entity has a very, very interesting role to play. But then comes a very interesting question. Can I trust that person? Right? I'm sure that is running in your mind. And that's where a whole lot of opportunities are there, my dear friends. Audit and opportunities. Remember, with every new technology, there is a risk. And with every new risk, there is an audit opportunity. That's how our profession survives. Don't you think so, right? First, what are the issues? Confidentiality. I thought my data in the blockchain is confidential. But hang on, there could be an endpoint vulnerability in one of the applications which is exposing the data, right? So there is a risk that my data may get exposed. Typically, there's not much of a difference compared to a traditional database, except that here it is encrypted, which again, in the traditional database, it's possible. Anonymity is difficult to achieve in private and permission blockchain. And you need to clearly identify what is confidential, whether it's the identity of the person, of the party, or the transaction itself is confidential. We need to define that, and that's critical. And let me remind you, this is not at one node in the entire infrastructure, each and every node. And just to give you a heads up, what is a node? I already told you that's every party into a transaction who is actually doing a validation. Let's take a simple example. In my example of WhatsApp, the 4 people had to approve, or one posted the 3 other people. All these 4 are nodes. Now you must be asking, sir, every transaction has to be go through all the 4 nodes. That is where your proof of concept, your proof of stake, your validation rule, your consensus mechanism you define. A transaction between 2 dealers is irrelevant for the manufacturer. So if these both people have given the consent, it will get updated in the manufacturer records. That's the end of story. A transaction between a manufacturer and dealer, the other dealers need not pay. So you can define the rules, and that's a whole lot of audit opportunity there, my dear friends. Understanding the consensus mechanism and auditing them against the business rules and validation is an opportunity. What are the things you can do for mitigation, right? As an auditor, what is it that you can do? See whether are there cases of off-chain storage of sensitive data. A classical example, one of them people always ask me, sir, if I go for a blockchain system, every transaction, if I have to go validate at all the 5 systems and levels, it is going to become impossible for me to track it. Okay, I understand. Going back to my car dealer example, you transmit or send only 3 or 4 information. One is the car chassis number, chassis number, how you pronounce it. You store your bike model number, right? You store some invoice transaction value, and let's say the invoice number or a unique data. That's it. and this will be able to retrieve it. So at the three databases, you are just storing this information to ensure that this transaction is validated and stored and secured. Rest of them you store it offline. I am not bothered about who's going to buy the car, what is his name, what is his details, what is his address. It's none of my business, right? So this is where criticality comes into play. And as auditors, you can look into that. You can use zero knowledge proofs, ZKPs, HOMO for encryption, basically analyze the hash, not in plain text, a bunch of these things which is possible from a security perspective. And not to forget, today data privacy is becoming a very, very important aspect for various discussion, right? So anonymity versus data confidential trade-off and things like that. Then comes integrity. The risk that a ledger is fraudulently tampered is fairly low because everything comes with a consent. But if you have private chains, there is a possibility that the so-called person who's with the control can modify. It also depends on the quality of the data input. An example could be for a cargo in transit. What is it that you're sending across? You may have everything backed by blockchain, but inside the cargo, there may be some nonsense, right? So you also need to couple this with other technologies such as IoT and see how this is actually taken care. What if lack of access control? What if all the systems which is giving the consent was affected by a distributed denial of service attack? Or what if it was controlled by a botnet attack, right? And each of these systems can actually have a control over the entire environment. What happens if there's there's something called as a 51% attack in blockchain where majority of the players turn bad and they start negotiating or dictating terms? In all those cases, it's going to be a challenge. So what is it that you can do? Option one is consider a bigger chain. That means more the nodes, difficult to get the 51% attack. Try not storing PII information. And try to put in oracles and security controls. Security controls, hundreds of them are there, right? Encryption, two-factor authentication, manual authentication, a bunch of those things automated. Put in an analytics-based tool, something like IDEA, which does a validation over there and gives a heads up. A bunch of these tools are possible. That's another audit opportunity. Third is availability. I told you a DDoS attack can probably deny, right? It's a real-time transaction. And let me tell you, as we speak today, one of the biggest reasons why blockchains have not kicked off as well as we expected is because it requires huge storage space, huge power processing, electricity, correct? And this is obviously a challenge, which I'm sure in the days to come, there may be hundreds of methods through which we can address. I'm not going to speak on those technologies. And the third is real time. Every transaction has to be validated by these systems. So how do you establish the real-time reconciliation? That's going to be a challenge, right? And I told you of a DDoS attack, interoperability risk, my blockchain, your blockchain, kaisa baat karenge? Pata nahi. Or my blockchain and your blockchain, how are we going to speak with each other? No. So what are the mitigation steps? Traditional methods, load balancing, redundancy, anti-DDoS measures, those are the typical, as simple as a captcha. A captcha is the simplest DDoS prevention method, right? A captcha, having a code sort of a thing, right? You can put in those anti-bot controls and things like that. And obviously you keep some gatekeeping redundancy to ensure the permission data is actually made. Next comes a very interesting thing, endpoint, node, and key management. I need to protect the user's cryptographic key. Private have obviously better KYC protocols for endpoints because you can define them. You need to also take care that in the name of security, you don't centralize it too much because the very purpose of it is defeated. But security has to be centrally managed. Applying patches, applying this, because at the end of the day, it's a server. If there was a zero-day vulnerability, it actually takes a hit, right? You own the key. Remember, he who owns the key owns the currency. In simple language, he who has the password is the entire maker of it, right? I know so many number of people who invested in Bitcoin very, very early stage, forgot where the password is, and that Bitcoin is worth millions today. And what if we are talking about quantum computing and other things which is coming and which is going to make up the key management? That's obviously a security challenge, which we don't have an answer, but those are good things to look at. For instance, ECDSA, electric curve digital signature algorithm, is a mechanism used in the Bitcoin. What if a quantum computing can probably break that? While we speak now, quantum computing, people say that they have successfully had their research, but there's no proven evidence for that. First and foremost is awareness of the user. Users ought to be aware. The traditional endpoint security layered with encrypted data at the endpoint has to be taken care of. The security update, the antivirus solutions, all of them have to be clearly defined. Diligently security and backup plan is to be made, otherwise it's going to become risky. Now that we are halfway through, and I hope I'm able to give you a perspective on what is blockchain, and I moved into the risks pertaining to blockchain, right? You're just trying to understand various things. And by the way, this is the various types of consensus mechanisms which are available. Frankly, even I don't know a few of them how they work. Right? And this keeps on evolving. These keeps on evolving. The risk that the transaction is approving without adhering to the protocols, a 51% attack. What if the previous set of rules and instructions have to be rewritten? What if there was an override rule written by, see, at the end of the day, it's a technology. It's a technology. What if while configuring the technology, I forgot the very basics at the time of configuration, right? So combining multiple consensus may introduce newer risks, damaging the integrity. Proof of work, proof of stake for public blockchain are popularly used. For private blockchains, we need to look into it, right? There are a bunch of these exercises. And consensus mechanism in simple language is, how do you put a transaction into my server or a database? What is the trigger? How do you agree? I accept, you accept. There's some sort of a mathematical hash formula which runs and then pushes back the data. So probably, yes, customize transaction consensus mechanism, think much more beyond, right? And look into pros and cons of each of them, and we'll have to look into it. And this is something which is fairly advanced. I'm not going to take up a little, go into depth with this. Smart contract process. I personally feel smart contract is a double-edged sword. It can turn sides and shield. It could protect you. It could also. A simple example. A smart contract has been written on a DLT environment where it says that on this due date, please go ahead and make a payment to so-and-so person. Fantastic. But the real question is, it forgot to check whether the money was there in that person's account or not. He just made the payment and then realized that there was no money there. If it was an overdraft account, it has to check a bunch of these rules. If it's a cash credit overdraft, if it's a savings bank account, a current account, whatever it may be, it's a crypto account, it has to execute a bunch of rules. So will it operate like an ASBA, like how it happens in the stock markets in India, where you're making an application for any of these new shares or stocks? It is reserved. That is possibly the solution, right? You need to block amounts. You need to create escrows. You need to block those into certain wallets. So that means a whole lot of new infrastructure has to be created. So risk that the validity of the transactions or the trigger events are incorrect. Automation incorporates vulnerability. It may probably lead to immediate financial misappropriation. Public chains can be attacked much more easily compared to private, because private is fairly secured. Private may have better KYC protocols. The real question is tomorrow, how do I update my smart contract? How do I patch them? Nobody has the answer. So a few mitigation steps or audit points. The code development practice, the secure development code cycle becomes a very important. Third-party reviews of smart contracts is essential. Using multi-signature smart contract-based ownership, adoption of self-destruction in certain cases may probably be necessary. So those, my dear friends, are a few of these security challenges. And let's not forget the blockchain and the GDPR, or the data privacy paradox. GDPR says that consent, protection, privacy, etc. Right? So the good thing is that both of them are focused on transparency. They are focused on individual rights. They're focused on democratization and provides much more security. The unfortunate thing is GDPR says you have a right to erase, but once you put it on a blockchain, it remains forever permanent. Are there no solutions? Of course, there are solutions. It's called as anonymization, pseudonymization, masking. All these are few examples. GDPR is predominantly suitable for centralized systems, whereas a blockchain says it's decentralized. GDPR requires user identity, whereas blockchain can also work on it. So there is obviously a paradox, but I think things are fairly progressing, at least on the private blockchain space. Now comes a very interesting question. How do I audit? What is my focus point? Thanks to the ISACA framework, I found a few of these points, which is fairly simple but yet powerful. Your audit scope or your audit points could be broadly at 6 levels. Pre-implementation, putting in governance place, developing this entire system, security, transactions, consensus. Let's spend a minute or two in each of them and probably, see the opportunities a little later. First, implementation. Is blockchain necessary? That is the first question you need to ask. You're saying, sir, you have spoken so much of blockchain, and then you're saying that you are asking, is blockchain necessary? There are 10 to 15 different blockchain decision trees available on the internet. You can just Google it and you'll get that. When do I think blockchain is necessary for my business? There are multiple rules. Only in such scenarios, blockchain may become mandatory. Other cases, some sort of an automation solution is sufficient. Examples could be, I am dealing with multiple people. Multiple people need to have edit access or write access. I need to establish trust. I'm dealing with multiple intermediaries. And probably I am okay if it is not real time. Even given all these scenarios, I may probably require a blockchain. So first is seeing whether the business objective and other things are aligned. It's a little unfortunate. I see many of these companies, including startup companies, where they're just encrypting the data, or they're just saying that it's immutable and then say it's blockchain. Hang on. Immutability is just one of the features of blockchain and not the only feature to decide whether it's a blockchain or not. Second, do you have a governance framework? Do you have a call, or does anybody decide who, when, how you need to implement blockchain? That's a critical thing. What about this vendor selection process? Because I'm sure it is literally impossible for you as an organization or the tech company to probably have their own blockchain solution implemented. If you have it, fantastic. How are you choosing vendors? Incidental to that comes the governance. How is the management having the oversight in this entire project? It could be at the beginning, it could be at the processing, it could be at the disposal, modification, the entire life cycle, secure development life cycle. How are you factoring regulatory risks? What if tomorrow, from a regulatory standpoint, there is a challenge? Often forgotten is business continuity. Do you have a system in place, or do you have a backing up solution? A simple example, what if one of the servers which had to authenticate is subject to a DDoS attack, or a DOS attack, is not able to speak? Means what? It means, I repeat, it means you cannot authenticate or process the transaction. So do you have a disaster recovery? That means, are you trying to say, hey, if I have 4 nodes, I need to have 4 backup nodes? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. Right? You need to have the DS systems. How do you manage vendors? Do you have an escrow agreement with the vendor? What if the vendor runs out of business tomorrow, right? This was, of course, one of the bigger challenge when it came into digitization of banks. All the banks wanted to upload, get started with the digital framework. And tomorrow, if something goes wrong, we don't know where it is. Then comes development. Does that entity have the development expertise? How are the system requirements and the design, the SRS document, what we popularly call, is it being defined? How is that being translated into the practical aspects of it? Has there been some testing performed? Alpha, UAT, beta, your design testing, your control effectiveness testing, your operating effectiveness, a bunch of these testing designs are there. How are you deploying it? Very important. How are you introducing changes? Are you doing regression testing? It's one of the most important testing and changes. You brought in a new change, it doesn't mean that the old things which are functioning actually fail. How is the security taken care of? Right? Do you have a wallet management in place? How are you focusing on secure development principles? What if there was a network vulnerability? What if the endpoint is subject to an attack? Then comes transactions. Of course, this depends upon a blockchain to blockchain. What are the types of blockchain you're going to have? Private, public, What are the validations? What are the rules? Are there going to be fees? Are there going to be savings in cost? And how do you define the consensus infrastructure and the mining infrastructure? Right? Proof of work, proof of stake. So these becomes your typical at a high level audit scope point. And not to forget, you have other interesting players to look into as well. Off-chain versus on-chain data. A huge audit opportunity. Audit of oracles. In fact, as auditors, you yourself can be oracles. That you are verifying a valid transaction which is there in the off-chain and bringing into the chain. How are APIs integrated? That's another area of opportunity. So for all of this, do you need to be experts in blockchain? Business knowledge or reasonable working knowledge of blockchain, not on the coding, the functional logic of blockchain, coupled with domain expertise. We are all finance professionals. You have a huge amount of expertise in each of these spaces, and that is where is going to become a big advantage. Please understand, people who can understand technology, even to a limited extent, coupled with a huge amount of business expertise, are the player who's going to be leading in the future. So how do I take it ahead? What is it that I can do? What are the ways in which I can get started? First, given a situation that you want to build a typical blockchain, or given a situation that you want to build in POCs, proof of concepts, go ahead. At this POC, there has been huge opportunities, my dear friends. First, deciding whether you require a blockchain or not in the first place itself is a huge opportunity. You must be wondering, sir, why is that an opportunity? There can be hundreds of cases without in a blockchain, you can actually go ahead. Are you kidding me? The answer is yes. Rather, beg your pardon. Answer is no, because there are a number of cases of where blockchain itself is not sufficient, is not enough, right? So you need to be very, very clear with it, whether blockchain is necessary for your solutioning or not. Let me try to show you one simple example. This is one of those decision trees which I made a mention of a few minutes back. Do you need a blockchain? Now, this is one of the simple or an initial way. Of course, it looks like a little like a ECG, up and down with some red lights and green lights. The red indicates that you don't need a blockchain. The green indicates you need a blockchain. The change in color indicates that you are trending towards either going for a blockchain or not going for a blockchain. Few questions. Do you have a middleman in your entire system? Do you want to retain a middleman? If you don't want to retain a middleman, that's when blockchain comes into picture. Otherwise, forget it. Second, are you working with digital assets? In fact, digitization of this assets is something which is very, very important and critical. A simple example could be, how will you represent a land in a digitized form? Because it's a digital asset. Blockchain works on a digital asset. So you need to back it up with something. Probably you would define 1 unit, 1 acre, 130 by 40 site, 160 by 80 site. You need to define that. There need to be rules of splitting it, demarcation, duplication, or not duplication, rather bringing it together, right? Joining it. Are you able to develop a permanent solution for digital asset? If the answer is yes, do you need to have a shared database? And you're working with multiple parties, and you want to ensure that these parties have right access in addition to read-only access, right? And if all of these things are yes, you almost decide whether you want a blockchain or not. The question is, do you want transactions to be public? If the answer is no, yes, go for a public blockchain. The answer is no, private blockchain service, right? So that is where, as auditors, you can focus on POC. Auditing the POC. I've done so many cases where I've upfront rejected that, saying that blockchain is not required and we have to suggest an alternate solution. We have in fact come forward and implemented it with my support of my tech team. Can I collaborate with startups? I think this is the time. With our finance and functional knowledge, you ought to collaborate with them. Go ahead, give free advice. Of course, take your judgmental call. Take a sweat equity. Let me tell you, the funding world, the startup world is only going to grow. People require places to deploy their funds, right? And startups are going to be the craze in the future. provide consulting, provide advisory, design. Of course, you'll have to do some bit of your research, right? There are so many platforms available today. There's so many platforms available today. If required to go a little into the tech, see if you can learn Hyperledger Fabric. Oh, by the way, Hyperledger website is an excellent source of blockchain information. Excellent source. And if you want to build smart contracts, Solidity is the language which is popularly used, at least on the Ethereum framework, the Ether. Ethereum, Hyperledger, Solidity, if you're having a fair bit of some bit of understanding, I don't expect you to sit and write programs and codes. If you can do it, that's great. But the focus is, are you able to interpret those language? And there's a whole lot of opportunities in advising and, more importantly, functional knowledge side. Many of them understand technology. There might be coders who have, some today engineering colleges are saying that we train them on blockchain, we train them on artificial intelligence, we train them on Python, whatever it may be. You may be having the best of the tools, but if you should know when and where you have to use it, right? And that's where functional knowledge is. You cannot chop, chicken or mutton using a pen knife. It's impossible. Likewise, you don't require a butcher knife to just, probably sharpen a small, even a cutter wire or something like that. So question is very, very subjective, and that's where the functional knowledge expertise is, right? I think we've spoken on this. These are the potential applications of blockchain and what it can probably create disruption. Smart contracts, digital rights, wages, escrow, right? Look on the security space. The security market in 3 to 5 years will get completely disrupted, my dear friends. The entire intermediaries in security market will get disrupted. In fact, if stock exchange adopt blockchain, of course, they're not doing it because the backend system also has to get aligned, and it also requires banking infrastructure. All brokers, already brokers are running out of business thanks to this, new age brokerage firms and modern ways of doing things. We are having companies who are doing zero brokerage charges and things like that, right? So equity, private markets, debt, crowdfunding, derivatives, record keeping is a huge use case. Our honorable prime minister did make a mention that we are going to have a digitization of health records, electronic health records, EHR. Of course, in various countries, there's much ahead. For instance, if you look into Canada or America, they're much ahead in that. Nothing wrong in we starting the trend a little later. But it requires a single source of truth. It requires authentication, healthcare. So the next time you go to a doctor, the doctor will enter your healthcare details. You will get an OTP. You give the OTP, only then he can view access. And the moment he enters it, his prescription, obviously you need not accept it, right? It will be there. You don't understand that system. You have to go through that. Then there are a bunch of these title records. Today, the title records is a massive problem, my dear friends, right? How do I maintain ownership? Voting, intellectual property. My dear friends, the opportunities are massive. It is not spoken of or not just heard of. That's a very important thing which you should be looking into. So what are the new opportunities? What are the new roles? First, implementation gurus. Any blockchain which has to get through has to go through you more from a functional side. Become functional consultants, process experts. For that, you need to understand, obviously, that underlying technology. Can we do real-time auditing or real-time monitoring? Tools are available, A simple, see, at the end of the day, analysis is all about rule-based and logic-based. You define the rule, logic, and you just analyze. Can there be blockchain fraud examiners and forensic experts? Oh, new opportunity again. My personal favorite is smart contract auditor. Because smart contract and that Oracle, which I made a mention of, that's going to be a big risk. That's going to be a big risk. There's going to be blockchain arbitration discussion. People have agreed, people are deciding to do something, not to do something, and you're going to have arbitration requirements. Blockchain analytics experts, right? You're going to have a bunch of these people who are just going to do analytics based on blockchain, and there are already applications available. Blockchain auditors and technical control experts. Permission blockchain, administration, grantor of access or roles. Permission blockchain, who access what? Your traditional IDAM audit, which is basically identity and access management, or IAM audit, right? You have to understand those, right? So there are a whole lot of interesting opportunities which are only going to line up in the days to come. What is the role of a CA, role of a professional, role of a channel accountant? Provide assurance to the users of this technology. That's the most important thing. Audit of contracts, oracles, I told you. Now there is something called as a consortium blockchain. That is something, blockchain can be deployed in 3 or 4 methods. One is a consortium where banks come together, insurance companies together. So, similar parties come together and implement. The second is forming a joint venture or SPV. Third probably could be, a combination or a centralized approach, whatever, all this. Now, if you look into the BFSI space, most of them are consortium blockchain. There's something called as a V-Trade. It's a combination of various banks and other institutions, right? There is something on quite a number of players on this space. I'm just not able to recollect the names, but there are a good number of players who are coming up with this consensus-based or the state finance-based, etc. Right? There's something called Voltron. There's something called Batavia, I think. V-Trade, I think I told you. Hong Kong Monetary Trade Development Authority. Huge volume. Administrator function, I think I spoke of it. Arbitration function. I think the opportunities are just huge. What's my key message to you? Blockchain can help in reducing inefficiencies, costs, frauds. At the same time, it can enhance the value, enhance the transparency, brings in an immutability. It will significantly reduce traditional risks, but bring in a new amount of risks. Right? It is believed that the automation of cars such as Tesla is going to prevent all accidents. Right? That's the entire model, but you still have your own fear. What if an attack takes place on you when you're sitting in that? Researchers are doing today. There's one modern research which is going on. There's a World Economic Forum publication. You can probably look it up either on LinkedIn or etc. Ants. Okay. Wherever you see ants, not one or two, I don't know whether it's called swarm or whatever, a group of ants, I'll just call it for a sake of simplicity. When they move from point A to point B, whatever direction it is, they have a mechanism to identify and not collide with any other ant. And most importantly, the beauty, when they're going in a group, most importantly, the beauty is their speed will never reduce. Observe it. Even if they're going cross-function. That's the same system which is probably, or rather, thought of today for autonomous cars and drone system. That's the research which is going on. How are they communicating and how are they speaking? Trying to, stimulate that using an AI pattern, right? So we are talking about newer things coming into play. So all of these new landscape has got to increase new amount of risks, which means professionals must start anticipating these risks. I think a good auditor is a guy who can understand risks better. And it's time for all of us to gear up for it. All right. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. About me or about my firm, we are Ken & Co. We're a professional firm predominantly focusing on technology and consulting opportunities. A few bunch of services we do in terms of, what happens, because many of them ask, sir, technology mein kya advice kar sakte hain as an auditor, right? Or what is it that we have an opportunity? Few years back, I started this, and the path and journey has been very, very exciting. And I think I'm very happy that I've chosen the road not taken. Thank you so much. As always, I keep my last few minutes for Q&A. I'll be happy to take Q&A.
Thank you very much, Narasimhanji. And I think for the participants, a wonderful opportunity to ask any questions to our speaker, Narasimhan. Any questions, please, you can put the questions in the chat box and we'll be very happy to take it up. I don't find any questions so far, so no problems. I think if what can happen is that if you mail the questions to us, we'll send it to Narasimhan, or you can directly send it to him. Maybe Narasimhan, you could just type in your email ID in the chat box, and the participants will have access to it. And at the same time, I have this pleasant duty of thanking him. I rang up Narasimhan, and in a minute he said yes. I'll be most willing to have some other commitment, but I'll immediately end that and join in. So that was very kind of him to come and speak to all of us today. This was also streamed live on YouTube. We had participants there also, and this will be there on our channel. So I just thank Narasimhan with the bottom of my heart, and also on behalf of Sama, for enlightening us about blockchain, the audit and opportunities. I think more important was the opportunity part. I think that's where professionals need to buck up, gear up, and latch onto the opportunities which are available in the space, because this is a great opportunity, as Narasimhan said. Knowledge. The domain.
We lost you there a bit. I think you're in a low network pocket.
The audit knowledge, the control, that's where we should be headed for.
Deepji sir, I think you're in a low network pocket, so we're not able to hear you. Sorry.
The domain knowledge and the.
Okay, that's fine. I think he's in a low network pocket. Narasimhan ji, very nice of you to address us. I think the way you unraveled the mystery behind blockchain, spoke about opportunities for auditors, the control risk dimensions, also the interplay between IoT and GDPR was a very nice slide, which we all appreciated. And I'm sure what we've learned from this program is going to go a long way in helping each one of us appreciate the path you've taken, maybe take over from there. So thank you so much for being with us and sharing your knowledge. And thank you all the participants for being supporting us in every Analytics Wednesday session. And we look forward to seeing all of you all in the next Analytics Wednesday session. Thank you, Narasimhan ji.
Thank you so much, Kat. Bye.
Bye, and have a wonderful evening ahead. Wish everyone very well. Thank you. Thank you.